Hey guys, what's up? It's Deprimido. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here in FL Studio and I'm going to be showing how you can really make your drums more bouncy. Bounce is really important in your beats. It's what gives the rapper a flow. I've got this pattern laid out right here. Very simple melody just to show you how to make the drums interact with the melody. And then we've got a bunch of drums coming on through here. So we can hear all of this. But yeah, I'm going to start off by just showing you the melody. This, by the way, is a MIDI that comes out of my 1K MIDI pack, which you can pick up using the link in the description. It's free. I dropped it when I reached 1,000 subscribers on Instagram, so make sure to go follow me there because we have another one coming out at 2,000. But yeah, this is what it sounds like. Pretty simple. So yeah, I'm gonna just kind of start coming through here showing you my workflow and what I do. So for me, I always start with the hi-hat pattern. I know a lot of people start with claps. If you want to do that, that's cool, but for me, I start with the hi-hat. So this is what I laid out. So before I can show you how to really make bounce, you have to understand how bounce works. So very simply, bounce is your brain wants to relieve tension in music, and that's what makes any music sound good. And that applies to bounce as well. So the points that your brain wants to relieve the tension at are the beats, essentially. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where your brain wants to relieve tension. So you want to create tension in places other than those, on that beat. So the way that you do that is by adding stuff in other places so that it can be relieved on the beat. So I'm going to show you how to do that. This first bar I just left blank. For me, I always like to start with just a simple two-step pattern. You can take stuff out and that's totally fine, but I usually don't. It just doesn't fit the type of beats that I make as well. I prefer to start with a two-step and add things to it instead of take them out. So this first bar is all just normal. Then you can see here we've got a double right here. The reason that we have that is because you can essentially hear it when it plays that. Your brain is immediately going to this beat and making sure that it hits right there, so that that's essentially how it creates bounce. So if I were to take this note out, it doesn't bounce anymore, right? It kind of does because this picks it back up, but if this was all gone, it doesn't bounce anymore. And that doesn't necessarily have to do with the lack of having things to make it bounce, because this is what makes it bounce, but these are there to relieve the tension that this creates. And that's how bounce works, and that's how all music works essentially, especially in melodies and stuff like that. So we've got that right there. Then on this one, we've got this right here. This is a little roll going on. Sounds like this. And you'll notice that I pitched this up a little bit. That creates even more bounce, because then in addition to wanting to have it hit on the beat, you also want to have it hit on the root note, which is where everything else has been. So we bring this up a little bit so that your brain wants it to go back here. It does, and then it registers that as bounce. Pretty simple. Then coming in here, we have probably the most complicated part of this hi-hat pattern. It's very simple really, but to explain, it's a little bit more complicated. This is a triplet, and it is essentially, it works the same as having this double here, except for it's drawn out a lot more, because instead of taking half a beat to relieve the tension, it takes an entire beat, right? So whereas with this double, 1, 2, 3, right? It's relieved on 3. It starts on 2. It's relieved on 3. Whereas with this, 1, 2, 3, right? So it's the same number of beats essentially, but it has more hits in it, and so it it's kind of difficult to explain, but it does create a different bounce. And so these are just some of the things you can do. Doubles, rolls, gaps, all that sort of stuff. Then here, I'm doing essentially the same thing as I did here, although it's not a roll. But you can hear this, right? So it goes high first and then it goes low, and then it goes back to the root note, right? And so that works for the same reason that it does here, and then it also is just standard doubles like here. So again, it's creating tension and it's relieving it. This is doing it both with adding extra notes and also with the pitch, right? So pretty simple. Then right here we've got a really quick roll. This works the same as the other roll essentially. But this, it works the same as the other roll, but it's a lot more exaggerated because it's so tight, and because this hi-hat is kind of loose. You know, it's a looser sound. It really does help you to have good sound selection, but to me, at least for the bounce, it's less important to have good sound selection as it is to have sounds that are the right length. So this hi-hat is a little bit looser, it's a little bit longer, is essentially what that means. And so since these are so tight, they're bleeding over a little bit, and it's just creating even more tension. Right? And then here, another roll, and here the triplets again. So that's basically what I did for the hi-hat pattern. Now I want to explain where the points of tension are most effective, right? Because you could just have random notes all over the place, and that's going to create tension, and it technically is going to create bounce, but it's not going to be effective because there's certain points that work better and that are really need to be emphasized, and those are usually the ones and the threes. If it's, you know, a higher tempo, if it's a lower tempo, then you're going to have the clap on 2 and 4 instead of just on 3. And so then it's going to be on the 2 and the 4 instead of the 1 and the 3. But for standard tempos, you know, above like 90 BPM, it's generally going to be on the 1 and the 3, right? So that's why you never are really going to take out the first note in any drum pattern, whether it be on the 808 or the kick or the hi-hat. You're essentially never going to take out the first note because that has to be emphasized in order to establish the emphasis on the 1s and the 3, which give it the bounce. All right. I'm trying to explain this kind of in a scientific way. I hope it makes sense. I don't have this scripted out or anything. I'm just kind of talking based on what I know. But yeah, so that's essentially how I created that. So kind of why this all works. You can see this is all just normal, but then here we're creating bounce on the third hit. And so there's the bigger bounce regions, which are the 1 and the 3, and then there's smaller ones, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And since this is the third hit, this is on the and of 1, it lands on the 2. And so you can kind of see why that works. You know, it's still, you want tension to be relieved on the 1 and the 3 more than anywhere else, but you also want it to be relieved on the 2 and the 4, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 is where you want all the tension to be relieved, so you want to create tension in between those. Now you'll notice here that I put this roll on the and of 1 instead of on the 2, right? So it's a little bit different because it sort of flips where the tension is each bar. Really, bounce is broken up into sets of 2 bars instead of sets of 1 bar, and that's because the way that a melody resolves itself, it generally takes 2 bars. Sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it just takes 1, but you're going to notice that especially with the kick and the 808 pattern, and I'm going to explain it better there, but it does take 2 bars to create drum bounce, not just the 1. So yeah, that's why this is on the 2, because this is the second set of bounce essentially. Is the best way to explain it, I guess. So this one doesn't have any bounce notes, but this one does right here on the 3. So the bounce is on the 3. This one, or I'm sorry, on the 2. This one is on the and of 1 because we're creating another set of bounce. So it can be different. Then this one, it goes back to being on the 3. This one, it's actually on the 4. And if we were to put it on the 3, it would still be bouncy, but it's especially bouncy because it's on the 4, so it's just creating more tension. It really always comes back to creating tension. Then this one, I essentially did a pretty similar thing to right here, where we moved the bounce. But the way that you're going to want to do it is with the first set of bounce and the third set of bounce, you're always going to want to have the bounce essentially be on the 3, and vice versa for the second and fourth set of bounce, you're going to want it to be on the 2. You know, I'm really hoping this makes sense. I'm not sure if it is. But yeah, so that's how I did the hi-hat pattern. That's kind of why I did it all. Then we can move on to the clap. I always do my clap in second. I just put it on 3. That's because that's the standard placement for the clap. So nothing really to explain here. Then I usually do my 808. The way that I do my 808 patterns is I take the root notes from the melody, which right here is these. I copy them onto the 808 and I press C to open up the cut tool, and then I played drums before I started making beats, so I'll just imagine that I'm drumming along to the track, and then wherever I would put a kick, I put an 808, which is later going to be layered with the kick. But again, it all comes back to creating tension, and the way that you do that is the 3 right here is the highest amount of relief of tension in the entire track, right? The 3 on each bar creates more release of tension than pretty much anywhere else. So obviously we put one on the 1 because you always put one on the 1 with the kick and the hi-hat and the 808. But then we also put one right here before the 3. We can unmute this 808 real quick. Right, we put one right here because it's about to be relieved by the clap, and you can hear that when we turn the clap on. Right, then this one is working towards the tension release that comes on 1. Right, so we can take this and put it on a separate pattern and kind of break it down to what it really is. And that, for this first 4 bars, is this. Right? Without all these extra doubles and stuff here, this is the bones of the 808 bounce, right? So we can listen to it one more time. Right? And then we just added in these extra notes to create more tension before it's relieved by the 808 hit. Right, and it's very similar to the hi-hat because there's the same points of bounce essentially. You know, the 3s and the 2s are pretty much where the bounce is, and we can see that coming back over here to the 808 on the main pattern. Right, but this right here, with maybe the exception of adding that, this is the most standard 808 trap bounce. This is how it kind of is. I don't necessarily know why, that's just how it kind of falls. As I said, I do play drums, and I started playing drums way before I ever started making beats, so I guess I kind of just understand this. I don't really know why I understand it, but that's just where my feet tend to fall when I play the kick, because if you don't know, the 808 is based off of the kick drum, which we're going to get into next. So we can unmute that real quick right here. For me, I pretty much always, 99% of the time, I just copy my 808 pattern right here. I paste it onto the kick. I press Alt-K, and what that does, it brings up this window. And that will put all of your notes on C, or you can change what notes you want it to be on by right-clicking it, right? But you're going to want it on C because that's where the sample is meant to be, generally. And then I just shorten them so that I can look at it easier with the 808. I prefer to have it longer. That's just up to preference. It doesn't actually matter unless you are working with an envelope. I'm usually not on an 808 unless it's like drill or something, but today we're talking about trap. So I'm not too much going to go into this kick pattern because it is essentially the same as the 808 pattern. The only difference here is I took out these 2 notes because it just didn't sound nice, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the bounce. So next, that's pretty much the bones of the bounce, is the hi-hat, the clap, the kick, and the 808. Even you don't necessarily need the kick, but just the hi-hat, the clap, and the 808 are pretty much the bones of the bounce. So now we can get into some of the more, some of the minutia, I guess. So this is an open hat. Right, it's working the same way as I told you with everything else. It's hitting on 1 because 1 and 3 are the biggest release points of tension. Then you have these notes right here. So, these notes are just pretty much to add to the, add to how hard it hits so that it can like really break down all of that tension. Then we've got these hits here. You can see for this hi-hat, I did turn on the envelope so that it cuts off exactly where I tell it to, so that these are short, right? If we were to do this, right? And that way it cuts off exactly where I tell it to, and that creates just more tension, because when a sound just cuts off like that, as opposed to this, right? This is a full release of any tension that's been created with shorter hits. So you use shorter hits to create the tension, and then you relieve the tension by having a full hit, generally on 1, right here, and that just relieves all the tension that was created by these 2 notes, therefore creating bounce. Or same over here, same thing. Next, I did an open hat. I kind of went crazy with these drums. On a normal beat, I wouldn't, but because I just want to demonstrate everything with these drums, I did add a second open hat and snares and rims and all that. Usually I would go the 4 chord drums and then maybe a hi-hat, maybe a rim, maybe both, but generally I wouldn't do this much. And that's because you don't want to overcomplicate your beats, because if there's too much going on, then the rapper can't find the bounce, and then it's all wasted. So you don't want that. But this one, I did the same thing as the other one. We've got the envelope turned on like that, so that this cuts off right here. And so we can go through, and I'll kind of show you this one. So as I was saying earlier, sound selection is really important for mixing and all that, but it's really not that important for your bounce. The only thing about it that is really important is the length of your drums. I showed you that with the closed hat earlier, and it works the same with this open hat, right? If it were much shorter, for example, we can turn up this out knob and that'll shorten it without actually cutting it. It doesn't have the same bounce. And that's because it doesn't give it as much, essentially, it just doesn't give it enough time to really release the pressure that was created by this. And so it just doesn't create bounce. It still kind of does, because it doesn't cut off like this one does, right? But it doesn't entirely release the pressure because it's just not long enough to do that. So you can see again, same thing as everything else. There's tension on 3, so we put it on 3, put this here, cut it so that it would create tension, and then it's relieved right here. Same thing as everything else. It's really pretty simple once you understand it. Next, we've got this rim. We can unmute that. Right, pretty simple. Just 3 hits throughout the entire thing. 1 is right here on the and of 1, and that's so that it can be relieved right here on 2. Then that's the exact same for that one. And then this one, we have the clap on 3. So that's where the tension is relieved. So we put one right before that to create the tension. Same thing. It really is very, very simple when you get down to it. So I'm not going to go too into depth on all of this. But it's really very simple. Next, we've got this snare. So this snare, it plays here on the 2, and that's just because right here the release isn't on 2, it's on 3. I mean, there is a release on 2, but you can still create tension there because it's not the big release like 1 and 3. So we're creating tension there. You can also hear if we were to put another snare there, it doesn't bounce as much as just with 2. Right, and that's partly because there's a kick hit there as well, and it doesn't really sound that good. But if we were to mute the kick in the 808, it's also going to take away from the bounce, but you can hear it doesn't bounce as much. It still does, but just with this, there's so much more because you want to hear that and you don't, so then instead of relieving the tension there, it makes it wait until the tension is released there, right? So you can just hear the difference if we put these here. Right, right? There's a lot more bounce on this one as opposed to this one because it's creating more tension over time instead of releasing it right away. So that's why that works, and that's essentially that's the full drum pattern. That's how I made this drum pattern and this beat. I'm probably not going to do anything with it because it's so overcomplicated. You don't want to make your drum patterns this complicated 99% of the time. I can't stress that enough, because if you create too much, if there's too much going on, there might be a ton of bounce, but you can't find the bounce because you can't really hear where it is because there's too much blocking all of it up, and you don't want that. You want to keep it pretty simple. So normally what I would have done is this kick and the 808, maybe one open hat and probably the rim. And I probably even would have made this 808 pattern simpler, especially in the second half, because this is pretty overcomplicated as well. But yeah, so that's pretty much the video. I hope it helped. Sorry if it was kind of confusing. I tried to do my best to explain it, but I understand that it probably was a little bit confusing. But hopefully it wasn't. It really just comes down to creating tension and then relieving it. And over time, you're going to be able to sense more where the tension is meant to be relieved, and therefore you're going to be able to sense more where the tension should be created, and then you know you can put stuff there to make it happen. But yeah, so that's how you create good drum patterns that have a lot of bounce so that rappers can find the flow, rappers want to use your beats, and you get placements and so on and so forth. But yeah, thank you all for watching the video. I really appreciate it. Go get this MIDI kit. It's linked right down in the description. It's the top link, and it's free. So definitely go pick that up. Go follow me on Instagram because I'm dropping another MIDI kit when I reach 2,000. Subscribe here on YouTube. I'm dropping a free melody loop kit when I reach 50 subscribers, which we're really close to. We only need 15 or 16 more subscribers, so we're pretty close. So make sure to subscribe. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Drop a like and subscribe, as I said, and I'll talk to you all in the next video.